A snow leopard brought its dying cub to this old man. And then something incredible happened. What made the most dangerous and secretive predator of the mountains come to its worst enemy, a human being, for help? There was no answer to this question. It simply stood there on the threshold, a gray shadow against the howling blizzard. The wind battered the log walls of the small hut and howled in the chimney as if winter itself had decided to tear this tiny island of warmth from the heart of the mountains. Kasim, a 70-year-old man with a face like the earth, cracked by heat and frost, froze at the table. His gnarled, strong fingers clenched the edge of the rough tabletop. He heard the sound through the roar of the blizzard. It was not the howling of the wind or the creaking of old pine trees. It was something alive, a scratching, scraping sound at the very door. He slowly took an old but perfectly cleaned rifle from the wall. It was a habit ingrained in him over decades of living here alone with the mountains. In these parts, uninvited guests rarely brought good news. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. It motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. He opened the heavy door, and an icy gust of wind rushed into the house, extinguishing the kerosene lamp and throwing a handful of stinging snow in his face. She stood on the threshold, a few steps away. A snow leopard, Akbash Whitehead, as the ghostly mistress of the rocks was called in these parts. Her smoky gray fur with black rosettes almost blended in with the blizzard, and only her eyes, burning with phosphorescent fire, stood out in the gray haze. Kasim froze, his finger resting on the trigger. His whole life was connected with them. Once he was the best hunter. His name was whispered by poachers throughout the ridge. He knew their habits, their trails, their fears. And he knew that a female snow leopard near a human dwelling, not hiding, meant only one thing: a deadly threat. But she did not growl. She did not snarl. She looked at him with such despair that the old hunter caught his breath. Then she made a barely noticeable movement with her head, nudging a small, lifeless lump of fur toward his doorstep with her nose. It was her cub. Kasim lowered his rifle. The huge cat's gaze pierced him to the core and stirred a memory he had tried to bury for almost 20 years. Another winter, another slope, and another female, caught in his trap, looked at him with the same desperate plea as life drained from her body. And then he found her freezing offspring. Back then, he just walked away. That sin weighed heavily on his soul, forcing him to abandon his craft and become a hermit. Now the past had come to his doorstep. The female took another step, nudged the kitten again, and let out a quiet, plaintive sound, like a moan. It was not a threat. It was a plea, the last hope of a mother driven to the brink. Kasim slowly, very slowly, dropped to his knees, his eyes fixed on the predator. The wind ruffled his gray beard. He stretched out his gnarled, calloused hand, not toward the female, toward the kitten. The kitten was ice cold. Its tiny body barely rose with each breath. Kasim carefully opened its mouth with 2 fingers. Its gums were pale, almost white. A bad sign. He looked up at the mother. She stood motionless, like a statue, only the tip of her long, fluffy tail twitching nervously. Any sudden movement, and she could have leapt up and torn his throat out. But Kasim no longer thought about the danger. He did not see a predator before him, but a mother who had brought him her dying child. He carefully picked up the kitten, as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. It was almost weightless. The old man slowly straightened up, without making any sudden movements, and backed toward the door. The female did not move, watching him with a burning gaze. Once inside the hut, he closed the door tightly and placed the kitten on an old sheepskin rug by the barely smoldering stove. He lit the lamp. In its light, he could see how bad the kitten was. Its fur was matted, its body was shaking, and its breathing was ragged and shallow. The old man acted quickly and with concentration, as if his former hunting skills had awakened in his veins. He threw some wood into the stove, and soon the room was filled with life-saving warmth. He found a jar of badger fat in his supplies, the best remedy for colds in the mountains. He rubbed it into the kitten's tiny chest and wrapped it in a woolen scarf. Then he put a pot of water on the fire, throwing in a pinch of dried thyme and elecampane root, herbs he had gathered all summer. While the broth was boiling, he glanced out the frosted window. She was there. She was sitting in the snow, curled up in a ball, but she didn't take her eyes off his door, patiently awaiting her fate. Kasim turned away. He had to try, not for her sake, for his own. He filled an old pipette with the warm, fragrant broth and carefully poured a few drops into the kitten's mouth. It twitched weakly, but swallowed. It was their first small victory. Thus began their battle for life. The whole night was spent in this struggle. Kasim, forgetting sleep and food, changed warm rags, poured the broth drop by drop, and massaged the little body. The old man, who had taken lives all his life, was now desperately trying to save one. By morning, the blizzard had subsided. The mountains stood in deafening silence, covered with a thick white shroud. The kitten was still alive, but its condition was not improving. Its breathing remained wheezy, and it hardly responded to touch. Kasim realized that his knowledge and old herbs were not enough. He needed help, real, modern help. In his closet, under a pile of old things, he kept a treasure and a curse at the same time. An old army radio. He hadn't turned it on in years, preferring silence and solitude. But now he had no choice. With great effort, he pulled out the heavy box, connected the battery, which he occasionally charged from a gasoline generator, and threw the antenna on the roof. After half an hour of crackling and hissing, breaking through the interference, he heard the distant voice of the dispatcher from the district center. Kasim's voice, hoarse and unaccustomed to long conversations, was brief. He didn't say who he was rescuing. He only said that he had an animal with severe pneumonia and asked if there was a veterinarian in town. On the other end of the line, his words were met with confusion. Send a specialist 100 kilometers across snow-covered mountain passes for some animal. But Kasim was persistent. There was such steely determination in his voice that the dispatcher gave in and promised to pass on the information. Kasim didn't know if anyone would hear him, but he had done everything he could. Returning to the kitten, he saw that it was starting to suffocate. Its little body was convulsing. The old man realized that time was running out. He looked out the window again. The female was sitting in the same place, like a stone statue. Her patience was supernatural. And then Kasim saw something else. Far below, on the path leading from the village, a dark spot appeared. And then another, and another. People. They were coming here. And the old man realized that news of his guest had already spread throughout the district. And these people were not coming here with good intentions. In the district center, a call from the hermit Kasim, whom many believed to be long dead, caused a minor commotion. The message was relayed to the only veterinarian, Timur Askarov. Timur, a 26-year-old guy with glasses, full of university knowledge and idealistic ideas about his profession, took this challenge as a sign of destiny. He had long dreamed of a real job, of saving wild animals, not vaccinating cows and castrating domestic cats. Ignoring the warnings of his elders about impassable roads and danger, he began to prepare. He packed antibiotics, steroids for reducing swelling, syringes, and IV drip systems into a medical kit. He threw everything into his old but reliable UAZ loaf, and barely waiting for dawn, left the city. He did not yet know that this trip would be the most serious test of his life. Meanwhile, in the village located in the valley below Kasim's hut, news of the snow leopard near the old man's house spread like wildfire. A shepherd looking for sheep that had strayed from the flock saw the beast at dawn and, rushing to the village, told the headman, Murat, everything. Murat, a stern and pragmatic man, frowned. A snow leopard so close to the village was trouble. Today it was at the hermit's house, and tomorrow it would come to slaughter the livestock in the pens. And God forbid it attacked a person? The responsibility lay with him. He gathered the strongest men. The decision was simple and clear. The predator had to be eliminated. While they were discussing the plan, Arslan, a sinewy man with shifty eyes, stood aside. He listened attentively, and a much more selfish plan was forming in his mind. The snow leopard's skin was worth a fortune. While Murat was thinking about safety, he, Arslan, would take what was for the taking. He slipped unnoticed out of the crowd and went to his house, where a rifle and steel snares were waiting for him in the barn. Kasim saw people approaching. He knew who was leading them. Murat, a decent man, but tough. For him, the snow leopard was a threat that had to be eliminated. The old man locked the door with a heavy bolt. He was trapped. Inside was a dying kitten. Outside, under the window, was its mother, ready to do anything for her child. A group of armed men was already climbing up the slope. And somewhere out there, on the snow-covered trails, was another enemy, invisible and cunning. A poacher who had smelled easy prey. At that moment, the kitten in his arms began to convulse again. Its breathing stopped. Timur, fighting his way through the snowdrifts, felt his UAZ desperately dig into the snow and stall. There were at least 10 kilometers of impassable wilderness before Kasim's hut. And in the bushes, 100 meters from the old man's house, Arslan cautiously cocked the trigger of his old carbine, aiming at the motionless figure of the female snow leopard. Time stood still, stretching the nerves of all participants in this drama to the limit. The seconds stretched out like a taut, ringing string. Arslan's finger was already white on the trigger. Through the optical sight, the female's head was a perfect target. One more moment, and the precious skin would be in his pocket. But at that very moment, a loud cry came from behind, from the path. It was the voice of Murat, the village chief. He was leading his men straight to the hut. Arslan cursed and instantly lowered his rifle, crawling into the shadows of the thick fir trees. Appearing in front of everyone with a weapon at the ready was not part of his plan. His trade was secret, and he didn't want any unnecessary questions. The chance was lost, but the anger in his cunning eyes gave way to cold calculation. If he couldn't take the animal with a bullet, he would take it with a noose. He knew these places better than his own backyard. Inside the hut, Kasim did not hear Murat's cry. All his attention was focused on the small calf in his hands. It went limp, its breathing stopped. "It's over," flashed through the old man's mind. But he couldn't give up. Not now. He quickly but carefully turned the kitten upside down and shook it several times. Then, pinching its nose with his rough fingers, he pressed his lips to its mouth and exhaled sharply and forcefully. Once, twice. Desperation gave him strength, and suddenly, under his palm, The tiny chest convulsively rose, drawing in air with a quiet, plaintive wheeze. The kitten was breathing, weakly, intermittently, but breathing. Kasim felt a single tear roll down his wrinkled cheek. It was only a respite, he knew that. But it was a chance. And at that moment, there was a loud, insistent knock on the door. "Kasim, open up! We know she's here. Come out!" Murat's voice left no doubt as to his intentions. 10 kilometers away, Timur looked desperately at his UAZ, which was stuck fast. The engine coughed once and died. All around, as far as the eye could see, there was white silence. Waiting for help was pointless. He looked at the thermometer outside the window, -25, and the wind was picking up. Staying here meant freezing to death. He made the only right decision. Grabbing the first aid kit and slinging his backpack with the essentials over his shoulder, he stepped outside. The icy air burned his lungs. The snow was knee-deep, and in some places, waist-deep. Every step was incredibly difficult. But one thought kept running through his head. There, ahead of him, a living creature was dying. And he, Timur Askarov, a veterinarian, was the only one who could help it. That thought warmed him better than any stove. He stubbornly trudged forward, guided by a barely visible power line, which he hoped would lead to the hermit's hut. "I won't open it, Murat," Kasim shouted hoarsely, clutching the kitten to him. "And I don't advise you to break down the door." Outside, angry voices could be heard. "The old man has completely lost his mind. He's hiding a beast in his house," someone shouted. "Kasim, don't be stupid." Murat roared again. "That beast is dangerous. It has already killed 2 sheep at the foot of the hill. If we don't get rid of it, it will come to the village. I'm responsible for the people." Kasim remained silent. He knew that Murat was right from his point of view, but he was right from his own. This kitten was his last chance to wash away an old sin from his soul. "Go away," was all he said. Murat cursed. "Fine, old man. Stay in your den. But as soon as that creature comes out, it's ours. Guys, surround the house. Not a mouse will get through." The men with guns spread out around the hut, surrounding it in a tight circle. Seeing this, the female lynx pressed herself to the ground, her muscles tensing like steel springs. She didn't move. She waited. Arslan, watching all this from his hiding place, grunted with satisfaction. Perfect. Now he didn't even need to hide. He would start setting his snares on the distant approaches to the house, on the path that the female would sooner or later try to escape along. In the hut, Kasim realized that he didn't have much time. The siege could go on for a long time, but the kitten wouldn't survive that long. He needed something to help the baby breathe. And he remembered an old method his grandfather had used. He heated several large flat stones on the stove and placed them in an old cast-iron basin. Then he poured a decoction of thyme and eucalyptus leaves, which he had kept for himself, over them. The room filled with thick, pungent steam. He built a makeshift tent out of sheepskin over the kitten and placed the basin with the stones nearby so that the baby could breathe the healing steam. It was a risky procedure, but there was no choice. He sat nearby, listening to every breath coming from under the skin and to the tense silence outside. And suddenly, after an hour, the wheezing in the kitten's breathing became quieter and more even. He was breathing. He was breathing easier. Kasim allowed himself a faint smile. Maybe it would work after all. Timur had been walking for more than 3 hours. He was exhausted. His clothes were soaked with sweat and then began to freeze. The wind blew so hard in his face that he had to walk with his head down. He fell several times, sinking waist-deep in the snow, and each time he forced himself to get up with great difficulty. The medical kit seemed impossible to lift. At one point, he fell and couldn't get up. Lying in the snow, he felt a dangerous, sweet numbness envelop him. He wanted to just close his eyes and fall asleep. But before his mind's eye appeared a picture, an old hermit and a dying animal, waiting only for him. He cursed under his breath, dug his hands into the snow, and got up again. And at that moment, through the veil of snow, he saw a faint light ahead. A window. He had made it. Summoning his last ounce of strength, he took a few more steps and literally collapsed into the clearing in front of the house, right into the center of a silent group of men with guns. His appearance was so sudden that the villagers were taken aback for a moment. Who was this? A frozen, staggering guy in city clothes, clutching a medical kit in his hand. "Who are you?" Murat asked sternly, coming closer. I'm a veterinarian, Timur Askarov. Kasim called me, Timur said with difficulty, trying to catch his breath. Murat looked him up and down suspiciously. "A veterinarian? From the city? Why?" There's a sick animal. I have to help it." Timur pointed to the door of the hut. The men's eyes flashed with confusion mixed with mockery. "Help a badger? This city boy has completely lost his mind." "Kid, you don't understand," Murat said harshly. "There's not just an animal in that house. There's a killer in there, and his mother is sitting right there under the windows. We're here to take care of this problem. So go on your way while you still can." "You can't," Timur protested passionately, his idealism colliding with harsh reality. "It's a rare species listed in the Red Book. Killing it is a crime." Murat only smiled bitterly. "My job is to protect people, not read the Red Book. Go away, kid." And at that very moment, when their argument reached its peak, a sound came from behind the locked door. It was quiet but distinct, a crying squeak. It was the voice of a kitten. It was the first sound it had made in all that time. Hearing it, the female Akbash, who had been lying motionless, jumped to her feet. The hair on her mane stood on end. A low, vibrating growl, full of menace and maternal fury, escaped from her chest. Her patience snapped. The men, startled by the unexpected noise, instinctively raised their rifles. A dozen barrels were aimed simultaneously at the door of the hut and at the enraged female snow leopard. The tense situation became explosive. The female's low, guttural roar hung in the frosty air, causing even the bravest villagers to retreat. Akbash's eyes burned with a cold, fierce fire. She moved slowly and insidiously along the wall of the house, keeping her eyes fixed on the group of armed men, her long tail swaying rhythmically from side to side. Every muscle in her body was tense, ready for a deadly leap. Murat gripped his rifle tighter. He understood. One more moment, one sharp sound, and the predator would attack. He didn't want blood, but now it was a matter of self-defense. "Don't shoot without my command," he croaked to his men. "Stop, don't move," Timur shouted, putting his hands forward as if trying to create an invisible barrier between the people and the beast. "She's protecting her cub. Don't provoke her." But his words were drowned out by the general tension. Inside the hut, Kasim could hear everything, the mother's roar and the alarmed cries of the people. He realized that the end was near. The kitten's squeak, which he had taken as a good sign, became the catalyst for disaster. The old man quickly but carefully transferred the baby into an old box lined with hay and placed it away from the door. Then he went to the door and pushed back the heavy bolt. The door creaked open. Kasim appeared in the doorway. He was gray-haired, stern, with a face like a mountain cliff. He did not take his rifle. His hands were empty. He simply stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. All eyes, both human and animal, instantly turned to him. There was absolute, deafening silence, broken only by the whistling of the wind in the tops of the pine trees. The female froze, her growling subsided. She looked at the old man, and there was no longer blind rage in her eyes, only a tense, questioning gaze. "Murat." Qasim's voice was calm, but it sounded metallic. "Put down your guns." "Qasim, step away from the door. This is no joke," replied the village chief tensely. "I said put down your guns," repeated the old man, taking a step forward onto the porch. "She won't touch you if you don't touch her child." "Her child is a predator," shouted one of the villagers. "He'll grow up and slaughter our livestock." Qasim slowly turned his gaze to the speaker. "This female," he said, pronouncing each word clearly, "brought me her dying son. She did not come to kill. She came to beg. She trusted a human being. Are we, as humans, really more stupid and evil than a wild beast?" His words hung in the air. The men looked at each other. They were torn between fear, a centuries-old habit of seeing predators as enemies, and an unexpected, vague feeling of shame caused by the old man's words. Timur, taking advantage of the confusion, took a few steps toward Qasim. "He's right. I'm a veterinarian. Let me through. I can save the kitten. If it survives, she'll leave," he said hopefully, turning to Murat. Murat hesitated. The situation was a stalemate. He couldn't shoot the animal with two people standing in the line of fire. But he couldn't back down and show weakness either. His reputation as a leader and protector was at stake. At that moment, Arslan, watching the scene from his hiding place, realized that his plan with the snares might fail. If the city veterinarian cured the kitten and the female simply left, his prey would slip away. He had to act. He quietly circled the group of villagers from the other side, hiding behind trees. His target was not the female. His target was the kitten. If the cub died, the mother would either go into a rage and be shot, or in her desperation, she would fall into one of his traps. And he knew how to do it. Qasim and Timur stood shoulder to shoulder on the porch, forming a living shield to protect the entrance to the hut. "Let me through," Timur said quietly to the old man. Qasim nodded and let the veterinarian inside. Timur entered the dimly lit room and immediately smelled the strong scent of herbs and damp steam. He saw the box with the kitten and bent over it. With a professional eye, he assessed the baby's condition. Its breathing was still heavy but stable. Qasim's inhalation had done its job. But it was only a temporary measure. Antibiotics were needed. Timur quickly opened his box, took out an ampule of a powerful drug and a syringe. His hands, frozen and unresponsive after the long journey, trembled slightly, but he managed. He drew the required dose into the syringe. Now the hardest part was to give the injection. Outside, Murat made a decision. "Okay, Qasim," he said loudly. "We'll give your veterinarian a chance. 1 hour. If in an hour you don't bring us the dead kitten so we can show it to its mother and she leaves, we'll do things our way." It was an ultimatum. Qasim nodded silently, accepting the terms. He believed in Timur. He had to believe. The villagers reluctantly lowered their guns, but remained where they were, continuing to surround the house. The tension eased slightly, but did not disappear. Seeing that the immediate threat had passed, Akbash's female lay down again in the snow, but kept her eyes fixed on the door behind which the fate of her child was being decided. At that moment, Arslan, having reached the back wall of the hut, where there were no windows, began to act. He had a long steel rod with him. He knew the structure of these old log cabins. There were always gaps between the logs, filled with moss. He found one such gap at floor level. Carefully, inch by inch, he began to push the rod inside. His plan was devilishly simple. Scare the kitten, make it thrash around so that its condition would worsen or even injure it. Inside, Timur prepared to give the injection. He carefully picked up the tiny paw. And at that very moment, a frightened, painful squeal came from the corner of the room where the box was standing. The kitten screamed wildly and thrashed about in the box. Timur and Qasim turned around. The end of the steel rod that had just poked the wall of the box was sticking out of the crack between the logs. What's that? Timur didn't understand, but Qasim understood everything instantly. Arslan, he growled, his face contorted with rage. He rushed to the wall, but the rod had already disappeared. And outside, chaos began again. Hearing the pain-filled cry of her cub, the female Akbash sprang up like a spring. There was no longer any expectation in her eyes, only the blind, consuming rage of a betrayed mother. She let out a roar that seemed to shake the old pine trees, and with one giant leap, she rushed forward. Not at the door, straight at the group of armed men standing closest to her. Murad didn't even have time to scream. The world exploded with screams of horror, the roar of a beast, and the sound of random shots ringing out in the sky. Chaos erupted instantly. The female snow leopard moved with blurred, inhuman speed. She did not attack to kill. Her goal was to break through, to sow panic. One of the villagers standing in her way was knocked off his feet by a powerful blow from her paw, his rifle flying far into the snow. A second villager recoiled, stumbled, and fell, covering his face with his hands in terror. Akbash swept through their ranks like a smoky lightning bolt, and in a few leaps was at the back wall of the house, where Arslan had just been. She smelled him, the scent of the enemy who had hurt her child. Arslan, who had not expected such a quick and fierce reaction, realized that he had become a target. He rushed toward the forest, but his heavy winter clothes and the deep snow hampered his movements. The enraged female was close behind him. Murat, momentarily taken aback by the speed of the attack, quickly regained his composure. "Cease fire! Aim at the beast, not the sky!" he roared, trying to shout over the panic. Several bullets whistled through the air, knocking snow off the fir trees. But it was almost impossible to hit the leopard rushing through the trees. "Follow me! He's taking her to the forest!" Murat shouted and rushed after him, realizing that if the beast disappeared into the thicket with the poacher, it would not end well. Some of the villagers followed him, while the rest remained in the clearing, confusedly helping those who had fallen to their feet. The siege of the house collapsed in an instant. Inside the hut, Timur and Qasim froze, listening to the screams and gunshots. The kitten, frightened and in pain, whimpered pitifully in the box. "They'll kill her," Timur said hoarsely, his face pale. "Or she'll kill them," Qasim corrected grimly. He grabbed his old axe from the wall. "Stay here. Save the baby. It's our only chance." Without another word, he rushed out of the house. He didn't run after Murat and Arslan. Instead, he turned aside toward an old ravine he knew like the back of his hand. He wasn't going to join the chase. He was going to intercept her. He knew the paths of this forest better than anyone else. He knew where a cornered man would instinctively run and where a predator would lead him. Timur was left alone with the kitten. His hands were no longer shaking. Adrenaline had cut off everything else, leaving only cold clarity of thought. He had to act quickly. He carefully picked up the baby again. It was trembling all over. Timur quickly felt its side. Fortunately, Arslan's rod did not seem to have pierced the skin, but it left a deep bruise. The pain and shock could kill the weakened animal faster than infection. He gave it an injection of antibiotics, then an anesthetic and a light dose of anti-shock medication. Now all he could do was wait and hope that the tiny creature would pull through. Timur wrapped the kitten in a clean rag, put it back in the box, and began pacing the room, listening for sounds from outside. The screams and gunshots receded, fading into the depths of the forest. He felt completely helpless. All his science, all his knowledge was powerless against guns and blind rage. In the forest, the chase turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Arslan, gasping for breath, zigzagged between the trees. He could hear the heavy breathing of the beast behind him and knew he couldn't run like this for long. Akbash was on her territory. She was not chasing blindly, she was guiding him, cutting off his retreat and driving him into a trap. Murat and his men were lagging behind, stuck in deep snow, their cries only further enraging the beast. Finally, Arslan jumped out onto a small clearing surrounded by thick windfall. The way forward was cut off. He turned around in despair. The female slowly emerged from behind the trees, her eyes burning with hatred. Arslan frantically raised his carbine. But at that moment, the figure of Qasim rose from behind the fallen trees. The old man moved silently, like a ghost. "Drop your gun, Arslan," he said quietly but authoritatively. Arslan flinched, shifting his gaze from the lynx to the old man. "Don't get in the way, old man. She'll kill me," he croaked. "You brought this trouble on yourself." Qasim replied calmly, moving closer, his axe looking no less formidable than the carbine. "You touched her child." The female stopped, watching the two men. She seemed to understand what was happening. Murat and his men ran out into the clearing and froze when they saw the scene. 3 men and a deadly predator in a tense standoff. "Arslan, Qasim is right. Drop your weapon," Murat shouted. But Arslan was cornered, and fear made him unpredictable. "No way! You're all in on this. That old geezer fed the beast, and now you want to pin it all on me." He screamed hysterically and sharply turned the barrel toward Qasim. He decided that if he got rid of the old man, he could deal with both Murat and the beast. But he didn't have time to fire. At the very moment his finger pressed the trigger, the female Akbash let out a short, furious roar and leaped. But not at Arslan. She leapt at the barrel of his rifle. The powerful blow of her paw knocked the sight off, and the bullet whistled into the sky. The force of the blow knocked the rifle out of Arslan's hands and sent it flying into a snowdrift. Before anyone could react, Qasim took 2 quick steps and was beside the poacher, punching him in the jaw with all his might. Arslan collapsed onto the snow as if he had been cut down. The female, having knocked the weapon away, did not continue her attack. She stopped a few meters away, breathing heavily, and looked straight at Qasim. There was no longer any rage in her eyes. There was something else. Understanding, and perhaps even gratitude. She saw that this man was not her enemy. He had protected her. Murat and his men stood as if struck by lightning. They had seen everything. They had seen how a wild beast had essentially saved an old man's life from a poacher's bullet. All their ideas about predators, all their stories about bloodthirsty killers, were crumbling before their eyes. This leopard was not behaving like an animal. It was behaving like an intelligent creature. Qasim approached the unconscious Arslan and picked up his rifle. Then he turned to Murat. "Now do you believe me, Chief?" he asked quietly. "This is your real enemy, not the one trying to survive in the mountains, but the one who sows evil out of greed." Murat nodded slowly. He approached, looked at Arslan, then at the female who was still standing motionless, and finally at Kasim. I don't know what to say, he muttered. I've never seen anything like this. At that moment, Timur emerged from the forest, staggering with exhaustion. He could no longer sit in ignorance and had followed the sounds of the chase. He saw the final scene of the confrontation and froze. "Kitten," was all he could breathe out as he looked at Kasim. Kasim turned to him, and a faint smile appeared on his stern face. "He's alive. Your medicine helped. He's sleeping." Hearing the word kitten, the female Akbash let out a quiet, questioning sound. She looked at Kasim, then at the path leading to the house. Her rage had subsided, and now she was driven only by maternal instinct. She wanted to return to her child. Kasim understood her without words. He slowly, without making any sudden movements, nodded to her and turned toward the house. And the female, no longer paying any attention to the stunned villagers, slowly followed him, keeping a respectful distance. Murat, Timur, and the others just stood and watched this incredible pair. The gray-haired old hermit and the huge wild cat walking side by side like old allies. The distrust and fear in the clearing gave way to shock and awe. They walked back to the hut in complete, almost reverent silence. Kasim strode ahead, followed 10 paces behind by the female Akbash. Her movements were smooth and cautious. She no longer posed a threat. She was a mother walking toward her sick child. Murat, Timur, and the other villagers brought up the rear of this strange procession, still unable to fully comprehend what they had seen. Their guns hung uselessly in their hands. Their world had been turned upside down. The predator they had come to kill had proven more noble than any human, and the old hermit they had considered a madman had shown more wisdom than all of them put together. The bound Arslan, who had regained consciousness and now remained sullenly silent, was led away by 2 young men. His fate was sealed. When they approached the house, Kasim stopped at the porch and turned to the female. He looked her straight in the eyes. "He's inside. He's alive," he said quietly, as if she could understand human speech. And it seemed that she did. She stopped, sat down in the snow, and stared at the door, patiently as before. She trusted him. Kasim entered the house. Timur followed him. Inside, it was warm and quiet. The kitten was sleeping in the box, breathing evenly, almost without wheezing. The medicine had worked. Timur leaned over him, checked his pulse, and examined his pupils. "It's a miracle," he whispered. "Just a miracle. The crisis has passed. He needs rest, warmth, and a few more days of treatment, but he'll live." Kasim's face showed enormous relief. The heavy burden he had carried in his heart for almost 20 years began to melt away. He picked up the box with the kitten and carried it out onto the porch. Murat and the villagers approached, looking at the little ball of fur with caution and curiosity. Akbash, seeing her baby, let out a soft, gentle sound, something between a purr and a moan. She did not rush to him. She waited for permission. Kasim slowly lowered the box onto the snow a few meters from the porch and stepped back. "Come here," he said. The female slowly approached the box on half-bent legs. She gently nudged her son's side with her nose. The kitten stirred in his sleep and squeaked weakly. Akbash began to lick him carefully and gently. Her movements were filled with all the love and anxiety of a mother who had found her lost child. The villagers watched the scene, holding their breath. At that moment, they did not see a dangerous predator. They saw a family. Murat approached Kasim. "Forgive me, Ata," he said, looking the old man in the eyes. "I was wrong. My eyes were blinded by fear, and I couldn't see the truth. Your job is to protect people, Murat. Kasim replied calmly. You did what you thought was right. But the world is bigger than our village, and there is room for everyone in it. Murat nodded. That day changed him forever. He turned to his people. We're leaving. And remember what you saw today. Tell your children, the mountains are not our enemies if we are not their enemies. He approached Arslan. And we'll hand you over to the inspectors. For poaching, for attacking a man. Your hunt is over. The villagers turned silently and walked back to the village, taking the captive with them. Their shoulders were straight, but there was no longer any arrogance in their gait, only thoughtfulness and respect. Only 3 remained in the clearing: Kasim, Timur, and the snow leopard family. The female did not leave. She understood that the kitten still needed help. The next few days turned into an amazing symbiosis. Timur used his knowledge and medicine to treat the baby. Kasim, using his experience, provided care and prepared special nutritious decoctions. He even managed to get goat's milk from a shepherd in a distant pasture, exchanging it for his honey. And the female Akbash lived near the house all this time. She hunted at night and lay nearby during the day, watching her son's treatment and showing no aggression whatsoever. A strong bond based on trust and a common goal developed between the old man, the young veterinarian, and the wild animal. For Timur, those days were the best practical training of his life. He learned from Kasim not only the wisdom of survival, but also an understanding of nature that cannot be found in any textbook. He saw how the old man talked to the mountains, the wind, and the animals, and understood that this was not madness, but the highest form of harmony. Finally, the day came when Timur looked at the kitten and smiled. The little one, whom they named Ayaz, meaning frost, was completely healthy. He had grown stronger, played friskily with a brush on Kasim's old rug, and looked at the world with curiosity through his bright blue eyes. It's time, said Timur. Kasim nodded. He knew this moment would come. His face showed both joy and sadness. He carried the grown-up Ayaz outside. Akbash immediately approached him. The kitten, seeing his mother, happily rushed to her. She sniffed him from head to toe, making sure he was all right, and then sternly but gently took him by the scruff of his neck. She looked at Kasim. Her gaze said it all: gratitude, respect, farewell. Then she turned to Timur and also looked at him with a long, meaningful gaze. Turning around, she walked away from the house, easily and silently, with her precious cargo in her teeth, up the slope, to her rocks, to her freedom. Kasim and Timur stood on the porch for a long time, watching them go until the 2 smoky figures disappeared against the backdrop of the snow-capped peaks. The old man felt a weight that had been pressing on his soul for decades finally lift. He was forgiven. He had found peace. What are you going to do now? Kasim asked Timur without turning around. Timur looked at the mountains, at his UAZ stuck in the distance, at Kasim's hut. I think I'll stay, he replied with confidence in his voice. I'll talk to Murat, to the inspectors. Here, in these mountains, we need to create not just a nature reserve, but a real rehabilitation center for wild animals, so that animals like Ayaz always have a chance. And I'll need the help of someone who knows these mountains better than anyone else. For the first time in many years, Kasim smiled broadly and openly. Well, he said, I think I have a couple of tips for you. Spring was just around the corner. Snow was melting on the southern slopes, and the air smelled of thawing earth and new life. Sitting on the porch of his house, which was no longer a hermit's fortress, but a center of hope, Kasim looked at the distant cliff. There, in the rays of the setting sun, he sometimes saw the familiar silhouette of the female and her now grown, frisky cub. His story of redemption was over, but the story of a new friendship between man and nature was just beginning. What choice do you think was the most difficult for Kasim? To let a deadly beast into his home, or to once again seek help from the people he had been hiding from for many years?